Yeah, Bruce, without a doubt, maturity and wisdom gives you a level of discernment. I work with people who are mature, they have a portfolio career. So they've had sometimes 20, 30, year experience and deep experience in a corporate world. And there's a real distinction out there between those who have lent into AI and they've got the mindset and their future fit is what I'm calling it. And then there's a really clear distinction coming between those who've leaning into it and those who aren't and have more of a fearful approach to it. And what we're seeing in an executive search and who gets these roles and a talent space is that it's actually got nothing to do with age. And I think that's quite an important point to make, because a lot of the narrative out there is ageism and it's hard to get a job over a certain age. Age is not relevant to how forward-thinking you are, how engaged you are with the tools of the day. And that's not just AI, it's anything. You've got to stay in your craft, and you've got to stay curious, and you've got to stay engaged with it. And we're seeing this night and day gap appear between the people who get the CEO roles or the big C-suite roles at the moment are the people who have embraced this. The people who I think are in a bit of danger of how are they going to work going forward, and that's where fear sits, are those people who are playing the rules of an old game, or using the rules of yesteryear, where they're relying on things like title and tenure.
Welcome to the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance, a podcast for anyone trying to make sense of intelligent machines, messy politics, and everything in between. But don't panic. Today I stopped to give a ride to Jacinta Whelan. Jacinta is the eminently successful lead partner at Watermark Search Melbourne. Watermark has provided the highest quality executive search services in Australia since 1979 and has earned its place as one of Australia's most reliable search firms. Jacinta specialises in placing seasoned C-suite professionals in organisations for specific missions rather than permanent role. Jacinta literally wrote the book on interim management when she published The Rise of the Interim Executive in 2020. Jacinta is driven by a mission of enabling organisations to access the wisdom and experience of interim executives and empowering professionals to pursue flexible and fulfilling careers. G'day, Jacinta.
Hi, Bruce, and hi, everyone listening to the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance. I just love the name. When we were talking about the podcast, I'm not really sure what we're talking about, but we're in. So thank you for listening, everyone, and we're going to have a fun conversation today.
Yeah, so a couple of things I want to pick up on is, what's your favourite line from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Well, a couple of things. You've already said the don't panic, which is probably the most iconic line there. But what I love about it is how amazing to have written a book that is a social reference. And there wouldn't be many people, even if they haven't literally read the book, who don't have it as a cultural reference in their linguistics. And so I think that's, rather than a line per se, I just think the iconic nature of the book itself is what stands out for me the most.
So speaking of books, what are you reading at the moment? Is there anything that comes straight to mind?
Because we're talking AI governance, I digest daily various AI newsletters. I read lots of fiction, I read lots of books, but probably most interesting to the audience is, for me, AI and AI governance and AI tools, etc., it's hard to keep up. And so I try and read daily some of the short, sharp overviews so that there I know when to dig a little deeper. And it's one of the ways that I try and stay on top of it, because I have spent some time really deep diving into AI. There's others that have done a lot more than I have. But one of the challenges I find is it's hard to keep up. And, I think that'll be a big part for the governance people out there listening as well. And there's an irony that's not lost on me that AI is saving us time. And so let's say AI saves you a day a week, 20% of your time. I feel like that 20%, I've almost taken back that you have to keep learning AI. So it's given and it's taken with the same hand. And I find, as I said, an irony in that I've definitely saved time, but a fear for me is how do you not fall behind? And I think that's a fear for a lot of people as well.
I'm sensing there's kind of two things going on. There's all this wonderful information coming out, which is mostly coming from consultants and software vendors, but there's also AI fatigue. I think every post on LinkedIn has got AI in the heading. It's almost like just keep scrolling. A lot of people, but you can't ignore it. But you've just got to find at what point you dip in, because it can become overwhelming. And I think the fear for a lot of people that you would work with, the older generation, is that they would be thinking this is a young person's game. But from what I'm seeing, it's actually the other way around. It's the older people who know, who have got a good sensibility radar and the sense checking mechanisms because they've lived a whole life of life experiences, and they would know when the AI is telling them that something is not quite right. And they've also got the experience and the gumptions to say no and to say this is not right. And that's what I think we need. What are you seeing in that space, Jacinta?
Yeah, Bruce, without a doubt, maturity and wisdom gives you a level of discernment, which I think will play to the advantage of the more mature person out there. An important point you raised, I'd really like to talk about. I work with people who are mature, they have a portfolio career. So they've had sometimes 20, 30, year experience and deep experience in a corporate world. And there's a real distinction out there between those who have lent into AI and they've got the mindset and they're future fit, is what I'm calling it. And then there's a really clear distinction coming between those who've leaning into it and those who aren't, have more of a fearful approach to it. And what we're seeing in an executive search and who gets these roles and a talent space is that it's actually got nothing to do with age. And I think that's quite an important point to make, because a lot of the narrative out there is ageism and it's hard to get a job over a certain age. I would push back on that and say, if it's age is not relevant to how forward thinking you are, how engaged you are with the tools of the day. And that's not just AI, it's anything. You've got to stay in your craft and you've got to stay curious and you've got to stay engaged with it. And we're seeing this night and day gap appear between the people who get the CEO roles or the big C-suite roles at the moment are the people who have embraced this. The people who I think are in a bit of danger of how are they going to work going forward, and that's where fear sits, are those people who are playing the rules of an old game or using the rules of yesteryear, where they're relying on things like title and tenure, and they're actually pushing the can down the road of AI or saying they don't believe it, or even they might believe it, but they're handing the agency to others in their business. And so I've got a team of people working on that. I often say AI is a DIY sport. You can't outsource or hand off responsibility of learning this. You've actually got to take the time to dive in. And those that have taken the time to dive in, there's no one I know who's across it all, and you don't even have to be a CTO or a CIO, but the people who are embracing it for their functional area, importantly, Bruce. So let's say you're a chief people officer. What does it mean for your function in your area? If you're in procurement, what does it mean for your area? If you're in finance, how's AI being deployed and assisting you? And that's the leaders. And so that circles right back to the comment of how are the older people dealing with it. It's actually not an age thing, it's an attitude thing. And we're, in a marketplace, my marketplace is mature people. And within that cohort, I see a real distinction between those who embrace and those who don't embrace. And I think that's the difference rather than the age.
Well, I think when thinking about the older generation, they've kind of been there, done that. They've been through all the tech changes from email back in the 80s to fax machines, to fax machines getting rid of them, to ERP, to cloud computing. And this is just another one of those things. So they've been there, done that. They've got the T-shirt. They've struggled with different technologies. So they know that whilst AI is powerful, it's not always right. And it needs to be questioned and guided with some mature human judgment. So I put it in the context of the serenity prayer. You would have heard of that. It's grant me the serenity to accept AI might be right, the courage to challenge AI when I think it's wrong, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think the people that can do that will lead us through this. And to all the older people out there, this is your moment.
I love the hope of that, and I love the positiveness of that. And I actually think that's that attitude thing again. It's the people who embrace this, see the opportunity in it. Like you said, AI is just the latest in a long line of tools that people need to use and embrace. I was talking to someone just yesterday and they said their first job with big, at IBM was teaching the typing pool to move from typewriters to word processors, right? And that was a big change management exercise. Typing pools were going to go and, the world was never going to be the same. And yet all of those people got higher value work and jobs, and the word processor enabled, you didn't have to, you could make some mistakes and go back and clean all the stuff we now, we could see. And, it's not a dissimilar moment in some ways where we are. It's a new tool that's being embraced, and we have to look for the hope and the peace that you can embrace, and where do you look for the opportunity? And I sometimes think for my job, if AI can do 90% of my job, which is literally anything that touches a keyboard, I often think if I have to touch this, then someone can probably do it better than me. And so what in my job doesn't touch a keyboard? Because if that's 10% of my work, I have to make that 10% more valuable to the world. And is that my intuition? Is it my judgment? Is it my ability to negotiate? Is it my ability to build relationships? Whatever it might be, but look for the pieces, the human piece. What can only the human do? And so I should be looking for ways to improve the more mundane tasks. AI for the mundane, human for the complex. And in that human piece, how cool that the bits that only I can do are now going to be amplified. That's where I think hope sits.
Well, just think you go attend a conference, you would capture all these pay for food, travel, transport, etc.
Yep.
It's all in your email inbox, and why don't you get an AI agent to scrape all that data off, create your own expense report, and then you get reimbursed within 24 hours. Then you wouldn't have to. That's one of the biggest pain points I hear from executives is dealing with their monthly credit card statement. Take that away. Get rid of that stuff. Let's get to the good stuff.
Yeah, I
had, just speaking about the change, you mentioned the word processing change from typewriters. Well, I have a similar problem with this transition because I've been working on a few different AI projects, and I'll give you an example: entering invoices into a system, this has happened to me a couple of times in the last few years where I've been working with organisations that are automating those processes. In one case, this lady, she was working with a community organisation, and it was to do with aged care and the charging the invoices back to their package. And all she did every day was come in, and there would be a stack of invoices on her desk, and she would key them all in. And then I went and sat with her to see what she did, see how long it took her. And I said, what would it look like if we could take all the data off these invoices and put it into a spreadsheet and upload it for you so you didn't have to? I think she fell off a chair and went into the comatose, the fetal position, because she said she needed a job and she didn't want to lose her job. And the fear came straight in, because I look at it as an opportunity, and people don't see their work as, it's more like a means to an end. It's so that she can go home at night and pay for the kids' education or whatever she's doing. She doesn't see work in the same way that I do. The other example, which was actually an AI project where we automated the data entry of all of these invoices. This company had 50,000 invoices a year. So the person that was doing that job, her job had to change. She now had to become a reviewer.
Yep.
And again, that was a really difficult change. She couldn't get her head around, I'm no longer entering these things, but I've got to think, well, if I was doing this invoice, how would has entered it, and has the machine entered it correctly? It was a huge leap. I could not believe how hard that leap was. And it was a real eye-opener for me, but how people do the same thing every day for 15 years, and then you take away that one thing, and then you give them a job to review what the machine's done, and it was just that cognitively couldn't handle it.
Absolutely. And it's the change management piece is, when I talk to people who are AI experts, where they are finding organisations and individuals are at, it's not even a conversation about what AI can do for them. It's almost getting people to the starting line to even be able to discuss AI, because that's actually a change journey before you get there. And like any other change, you've got to take people on that journey. So it's almost like cleaning your data before your data goes into a new system. there's a whole lot of work for us all to do to get to the starting line before AI is actually really deployed correctly. And, that's actually not even about AI. That's just change of humans. The interesting part on that, we are seeing this trend across organisations where the functional roles of chief people officer, so head of HR, and CIO are merging. And they're two roles that didn't necessarily, no one would put those two together to start with, right? They're not usually the closest of neighbours. They are working either shoulder to shoulder and or the chief people officer. And we saw this Atlassian announced just this week that the chief people officer has taken on IT because IT is now a functional tool that's driving the people change that we need for the organisation to go forward. And, even as early as 12 months ago, you wouldn't have seen those two roles merge. So things are happening in real time. But I think that talks to the change piece is the bigger piece. So because you would have thought, in that role, the CTO would have maybe had the top job. But what we're seeing is the CPO is rising to the top of those two roles as they merge.
Yeah, you know what that reminds me of is there's always been a challenge with IT and marketing because marketing have had some systems that are really end user systems like social media or websites or where IT doesn't really need to be all that involved in running those systems. And there's always been a tension between IT and marketing because IT know all about the systems, but marketing know all about marketing. They've got their own tool set and they don't want IT involved. It's very much like that. It's going to upend all the way we used to think about how we get our work done, and we have to rethink organisations. And I want to ask you a question about this CTO, CIO, CPO roles is that AI agents and tools can be deployed everywhere across an organisation. So what I'm seeing is that how's ownership going to work in a very fragmented way of working that's almost defragmenting it more than the way it is today? Who owns the AI and how should it be owned? What are your thoughts on that from what you're seeing?
Yeah, we are hearing and seeing that it's owned more functionally. So rather than have someone come in who's an AI transformation agent that sits across the company, independent and outside of the functions, we're actually seeing the requests for change and for people with experience having functional expertise first and then AI that supports that. It's because of that ownership piece, I think, Bruce, where and then importantly for the governance of who owns this, some examples I've seen and hear are, let's say it's marketing, because we were talking about marketing before. A marketing manager now might have 2 humans who work for them and 10 agents. So in their org chart, they have 12 direct reports. Now, and the reason that agent has an employee number is because they're doing a task that if they weren't doing, someone else would have to do. And let me give an example of that. If you've got an agent that writes your internal newsletter every week and it knows the tone, it knows the fonts to use, it knows the corporate history, and you input a couple of updates for the week and it sends out a note. If AI wasn't producing that, someone in the marketing team would have to. But importantly for the ownership of that, who owns the prompt, who owns the tools of that? Because let's say the font changes of the company or the brand changes. Someone has to be able to go back and find that agent, and it has to sit somewhere and have governance and have a reporting line so that the marketing manager, once every 6 months or once every 12 months, probably has to review that employee because they are doing a job that company needs done. And what you can't have is an agentic agent which just goes off forever, infinitum, doing something. No one knows where it sits, where's the control, where's the governance around it. And so what we're seeing is AI being embedded a bit more in the function and some of the tasks being done by agents to allow those 2 marketing managers that were in the team that we spoke about to then have a review process or be the manager of an agent and own that piece. But it's importantly proprietary information for the organisation that they have to be able to find again. If that manager left, it can't be them that wrote the prompt and built the agent, because when they leave, it goes with them essentially. So you've got to have this library of agents that are registered and recorded for that corporate. And you'd have some in marketing is the example I'm using, but you'd have some in finance that you might have an agent that reviews every single general ledger item and looks at exceptions that come up. So it reports against an exception rather than a detailed report. And you'd have some in likewise, you'd have some in supply chain, you'd have some in every legal, you'd have agents that sit in every area, but importantly, they're owned by the function. Is that answering, Bruce, a bit what you're asking?
I'll put it. Yeah, absolutely. What's coming up in December is that the privacy regulations here in Australia are changing, so that at the moment we do not have mandated AI governance in the corporate sector. And so, but this is the closest thing to it. So the privacy principles are changing so that if you have an automated decision-making machine in your organisation and it's using personal and private information to make decisions. I'll give recruitment as an example. If you submit a resume, it makes a decision on your applicability for the job. Now, if you now, from December, you'll have to be able to explain any decisions it makes, be able to deal with any contested decisions, be able to audit those decisions and be fully transparent to the person who submitted that CV that it is being audited, it's being reviewed by a machine. Now, you would think that, I think of that from an IT perspective, and that's what I do, that's how I do. But if you think about it from a manager's perspective, and they're going to say, well, how is that all going to work? And I said to someone only just recently, I said, think of that machine as a person. If that person was reviewing all those 185 applications you've got, they would put them into piles, right? These ones were passed, these ones reject, these ones are the maybes, and then there would be criteria around all of those decisions. So you would sit down with the person who made all those decisions and you would be able to understand the rationale. So if somebody does contest that decision, you do in fact have an audit trail, you do have a process.
Yes.
It's just we're translating this process into a digital world where people can't see it. And that's the bit that we need to unpack for this change, is because people would be very, very fearful because the systems they're using probably can't provide the data that they need to explain the decisions. They're probably not auditable because this change hasn't been required yet. And so the vendors who are supplying these systems better get on their bicycles and get things moving, because the organisations are going to be asking for this. And it's no different to having a person humanly review those applications. It's just that the machine's doing it and the machine has to be accountable.
Right there, what comes to mind for that example, it's about having the right prompt or questions in the decision-making framework. And that should be, if it's an agent that's fully approved by the organisation as opposed to an individual who's made up their own, then you would put these new privacy laws in. You would have some decision go, no-go, stop points of have they got the right qualification, have they had experience in a similar, whatever the criteria is that a human would use as well. And so if you've got the right auditable criteria in there, then you can defend it and you can defend the decision making. So I see that working pretty well and feel comfortable that you could build a system that can address all of that.
Yeah, well, the extension of it is that whatever those rules are that they build at the start need to be stable. So with AI systems, it learns and and just like a human does, a human might have a preference. And that human say, oh, well, I actually prefer a lady for that job, or I prefer an Indigenous person for that job. And it's that drift that organisations also need to be on top of, because if you've historically hired a certain way and the machine is learning that way based on your historical way of working, that's a really important thing to make sure that you nail down as part of this process.
I feel like you could put that into your prompt. Do not bias on, you could build that in and actually have it and review it, and in true governance, you would at the end of 12 months while you're reviewing employee agent 2, who is the one responsible for this, you would have data that pulls every 12 months when you review them to say, now let's look at it. And, if you start to see some patterns, they only placed women in every role, then you look at that and you look at the exceptions, right, of what's happened here. So I feel like you could put some criteria against that.
Yeah, absolutely. You could test for that. And the point I'm making is that, with the systems that we've used in the past, we kind of, because they're fixed, we set them up, we let them go, and then we don't look at them again until the 3-year stage, at which the vendor says, oh, we've got to do another 3-year agreement. People don't look at it until then, and they just assume that it's a fixed system. It does what it's supposed to do and people are using it properly. But this will require a lot more checking, a lot more oversight, a lot more metrics. So if you think of someone's job being in IT, of doing data entry or whatever those things that they do at the help desk, well, that work will be replaced in a review function. So you'll be setting up all these processes to make sure that the agents are doing what they're supposed to be doing on an ongoing basis, not just at the beginning when they've been established. So the people's roles will change, and they'll be changed to more work with the machines than they will be to be replaced by the machines, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would have the same, positive glass half full approach to it. There's days with AI that you can get, close to the ledge almost with some of the scariness of it and the, we're all going to lose our job, the dystopian type, nature of it. And, without a doubt, we all have had those moments. And I consciously pull it back and twist to hope and twist because we're still at such an early stage that, they're calling it the toddler type stage. And we're the leaders and we have to control this. And so right now, the decisions we make around what you're doing, the governance and the frameworks, that's where you're going to put some guardrails in really early. Yes. So I love what you're doing on that space.
Yeah. So what do you, thinking about your career, was there a particular moment or news story that made you start paying attention to AI more seriously?
I like to think, Bruce, that by being particularly interested and focused in portfolio careers and the newer way of working my whole life, that I've had a radar and interest in seeing what's coming down the pipeline of how people work and how they engage with work and different models. And so because I very actively follow that, I probably was filtering this conversation and the wealth of information coming around AI. And importantly, we've got a whole lot of data from the pool of people who work this way. And interestingly, interim executive or people who choose to work this way, they know it's on them, self-agency on them to stay current and stay ahead. No one's job to give them L&D. They're not in a corporate where that's being provided. And so our pool of people also front-footed into, I need to learn about this to stay current. And so it was probably the combination of hearing the global trends, talking to the people who work this way, and having those daily conversations with them about we all better get on to whatever's the latest thing. Just like AI happens to be this one, but just like it was when there's new laws coming, you've got to stay ahead of those. Whenever there's a change come in, if there's a new privacy law, you've got to be on the radar looking out if there's new taxes that are coming in or payroll, reviews or, Senate inquiries into various things. The people who have a radar for staying ahead and curiosity, I think plays a big part in my career of where I saw and thought I'll just have to keep interested. And then there was a point where I did last year I did an AI leadership course because I was a bit fearful. I was like, has the horse bolted and am I behind? So I've probably from a place of fear thought I better go and do a bit more formal study. And the piece that probably now inspires me or has a healthy dose of fear for me is I don't want to be left behind and I need to stay up to date. So I've got to put some mechanisms in place for myself to how to do that, which is these daily feeds of the latest information and choosing which parts to really read because there's so much.
Yeah, my advice to anyone over 50 would be just start playing with it. Start experimenting, and it's all free. I've got free Claude, I've got free ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And there's other tools that people can access.
And I also think that it's playing with it. It's making it personal always makes a difference. So, plan some menus, book a trip, play with it in ways that give you benefit personally, allows then you to have built some confidence to take it into a work setting or a different setting there. I often say, Bruce, that AI is a DIY sport. It really is. You have to. You can't outsource it. You can't, give me the latest, Bruce, or think that someone's going to give you the 5-minute snapshot and I'm across it. It's not one that you're briefed up on, as some leaders think, just give me the high-level executive summary. It's a very personal thing, and if you don't actually get into the sandbox and play, you won't know no matter how well you're briefed.
Yeah, well, the people that know how things work in the world are always the hairdressers because they know what's going on. So I was having my hair cut the other day and I said to the lady, your job will never be replaced. You'll be here forever. She goes, oh yeah, when first AI came in, I was I just not interested, didn't care. Then I realised I could come home at night and I'd say, Siri, I've got potatoes, carrots, and something else, and give me a quick recipe that I
Yeah, right.
can make with just 3 or 4 ingredients. Would come up with it and give her a recipe. And then the next time she did it, I remembered. I said, oh, last time you said you had some potatoes. Do you still have those? Because you could put them in this and you could make that. And she loves it now. She's using
Yeah.
it all the time because it actually solves a problem that she didn't have access to before.
Bruce, I have a similar story. I was buying a piece of outdoor furniture the other week, and I was in a showroom looking at an outdoor couch, and the ladies behind that were helping me were mature aged retail on the floor saleswomen. And I said, how do you design your showroom? Do you engage AI and do you show it the space and what can we do with all this furniture? And they're like, oh, we don't. Gosh, we don't know how we'd ever be able to do that. And there was an open area. And I said, let me have a look at your computer and see if you've got the Copilot down the bottom. And they did. So I literally took myself behind their counter and they had a little computer there. And so I was showing one lady and the next lady came across and then a lady from across the floor came across and we were all. And then so I took a photo of the floor showroom and put it in and said, redesign me the winter program, the winter look for the outdoor furniture. And it popped up in a couple of seconds. And they were like, wow. And then I had to, I said, you go and play, see what you're allowed for your corporate level of, access and all sorts of that's the normal stuff. And I had to come back the next week and pick it up because I'd bought it, but they had to get it delivered. And I walked in there like, this is the lady that taught us all how to do AI. I've been home. I've been telling my kids. I've been telling my grandkids. They were so pleased to have been shown the simplest of things. I just showed them what the icon looked like. Oh, that icon there is AI. And they're like, oh, we wondered what that was on our screen. So and then they'd all gone off and played. And I said, why don't you go home and see if there's a recipe you could use? And these were mature ladies. I'm going to say, they were all over 60. There was 4 of them on the floor. Oh, and the week later, they had they literally blossomed.
That's fantastic because what you're doing is you're taking away the stuff that they don't want to be doing, right?
Yeah, but it's also that they're like, oh, that this mythical AI that's already bigger than us. And I was like, it's actually not. That's it. That little icon. That's not scary. And so it's this change journey of, let's open it together. And they all stood around and I was like, you hold the mouse because actually, you'll learn more if you hold the mouse and then you press it up there. And then they're like, do that again. I didn't see it. And you literally take them on the change journey. So anyway, I digress.
So thinking about your professional life, you've been in this game for a long time. And congratulations for sticking with it for so long. What is the change that you seek to make in the world?
The piece that's driven me for a long time, Bruce, is I have been an advocate for interim executives, portfolio careers, different ways of working for senior executives. And that's now on trend to some degree, and a lot more people are talking about it and understanding what it is. And I have been doing it for such a long time. I often say I was doing it before it's trendy and I'll be doing it long after it's, an accepted way. And so what drives me is educating the market and the different ways of working and showing that executive cohort and people that there are different ways that you can engage with work, and particularly proud of how that's evolved. Now it's the world's evolved rather than, but you had to have some early adopters. You had to have some models to show that it worked. You had to have people who were already invested in doing this and have it ready for when the world's ready for it. And so they're probably some particular drivers. It's an area that I'm deeply passionate about. I love doing it. And as I say, I was doing it long before it was the world was ready for it. And I'll still be doing it long after the world was either ready or not ready for it.
I think it'll be the permanent roles will be the exception, won't they, in the future?
What I do see, Bruce, is even it evolves so quickly, but now we're an executive search firm, and so we have permanent roles and we have interim roles, portfolio roles, and we have board roles. But if I just think about our permanent and our interim divisions, now 50% of the work that comes in the door when a phone call comes, 50% of people are asking for a permanent. I often use the terminology buy, borrow, build, which is a very HR people term. Our search business is where that you come to buy talent and bring it into your organisation, and our interim business is where you come and borrow talent. And now 50% of the calls go to the buy group, so we need a permanent person, and 50% of every client that reaches out to us says, could I borrow some skills for a point in time that I need them? And so that's a huge growth. Once upon a time, that would have been lucky to be 5% of the calls. And so for it to now be 50%, but importantly, that's the company ringing us, right? Importantly, for any market to work, you need supply and demand. So the demand being the clients wanted 50% of the time. But the biggest shift I've seen in doing this for 30 years is that the supply side, the people are choosing to work differently. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, a lot of social overlays. We're living longer, the longevity conversation, lifestyle. Since COVID, people want more alignment with purpose, with passion. The way we engage with work has fundamentally shifted and it's not going back. And so that there are models and way to work that are not just your standard and permanently employed is something that I'm passionate about. So I deal with just the executive cohort, but I think it's bigger than that. And the conversation that you can enjoy work, you can do work that lines up with your purpose and passion. You can have some flexibility and do that work and still have a life. That part, I'm particularly pleased that conversation's now allowed.
So take me back 30 years ago. What was the spark, or what got you to? How did you start this? Like, what was the origin story for you?
Most people who land in executive search or recruitment land here serendipitously. And so I'm an accountant by background, Bruce. And
you didn't tell me that.
And I wouldn't have, that was probably never my destiny, let's be honest. Mm-hmm. And so I landed in a role where I was travelling through Asia. It's quite a funny story. I was travelling back through, I lived in London. I was coming back to Hong Kong and stopped literally just for a stopover. And I went and sat in the reception area of an executive search firm while I waited for my friend who was going for a job. I was just there for the half an hour until we could go on the tour of Hong Kong. And someone walked out to reception and said, what are you doing here? I said, you don't need to see me. I'm just waiting. 10 interviews later and the rest of that day, and they offered me to come and start the interim division of that firm.
Oh, wow.
Even though I was leaving the next day to come back.
That's like a sliding doors moment.
Yeah, literally sliding door. But what attracts me to this is I love the pace of it. I love the problem-solving piece. So I really like listening to the client challenge. I really like hearing people's career stories. And I didn't know this was a superpower, but I think my superpower might be hearing people's journey and seeing themes in them and being able to help them really crystallize what it is that's their superpower. It feels like you've got a real skill in X, Y, Z. And for whatever reason, that part I really love, having the conversation with people and uncovering what it is that might be their superpowers and then hearing the client problem. And I get the real buzz from the match of those two. So if a client says, I need someone to help me get this project back on track, it's off the rails, something's gone wrong, I'm like, I know exactly who could do that, who could do that. And then getting them that solution at a pace really fills me with joy.
Yeah. Do you like a matchmaker? But for
do you know what? That's actually what it is.
Corporate world.
It's matchmaking, or it's a connector and of networks, really. So knowing who in one network needs something and who in another can deliver it. This happens to be people, but it's probably that connector role.
Yeah, and how do you see that role of those people that you connect? How do you see them changing as a result of AI? What would they be in less demand, more demand? What would their part of their role change? Where do you see that being impacted?
I mean, I feel like the people in our pool will be affected the same as anyone in any pool. So they're not affected more or less. But what I do see changing in how people engage with work because of AI is you'll be doing the higher order work, as we spoke about. We're seeing this real trend where organisations are having leaner core teams of business as usual. And then what they're doing with more regularity and more acceptance is borrowing the right skill at the right time to move the organisation through where it needs to go. And so what that often looks like for an interim is bringing them in for 6 months to get a project back on track or to hold the fort while we go to market for a permanent person, because the requirements of a leader in today's market are evolving so quickly, the pace is so quick that it's pretty unrealistic that one person is going to be that have the right skills and the capability to lead an organisation through all the ups and downs of the cycles of a business. And so what companies are saying, there's some people who are really good at growth cycles, there's some who are really good at expanding geographies or new products. Like, let's find the area you're really good at rather than expect you to be okay at everything and learning where potentially you have to learn and get up to speed. The organisation's missed a competitive advantage, or it couldn't deliver in the time that was needed. So for people to have all the capability and capacity that is expected is somewhat realistic. And so we're seeing organisations saying the right skill for the right time, how we're going to get through and deliver. And so what you've then got a pool of people who've already identified what their skill is, or their superpower as we would call it, and they are in the market for opportunities to drop in for shorter time and then come back out. So it's this portfolio of people who are working differently, and organisations are really seeing the value in that.
Yeah, so if you end up using AI to score people on a match basis to match attributes, you probably should call that Dexter then, shouldn't you?
Yeah, true, right? An interesting thing on AI, I'm hearing this from quite a few clients, is to some extent AI in recruitment might be nullifying itself. So let me tell you what I mean by that. If all the candidates are using AI to write beautiful applications, to do their resume perfect, then what we're seeing is the companies are seeing huge volumes of people coming through who are all perfect for the role, right? So the companies are saying they are getting more volume than they've ever had of perfect candidates. And so it's hard for them to, filter through and find that where's the depth behind the perfect AI resume. And so in a way, they're almost the perfect resume, too many applications has cancelled each other out. Still just as hard to find good talent. You've still got to make sure they fit with your corporate culture. You've got to understand the nuance behind what they've said they can deliver. Where's the proof points? All the stuff that a human can find out for you. And so without a doubt, it's there. And, organisations have the AI running, individuals have AI running, but there's absolutely a role for human. And the human piece is becoming, as I started by saying, if the human piece is 10% of the role, that 10% has almost now become 90% valuable.
That's making sense of the world. I think that's where the people who have
that's
got
where
to
you
judgment.
started by saying, judgment, experience, wisdom, bit of been there, done that, some of the scars of lived experience, all of those things, and your ability to interact and have conversations and nuance, I think, is the bit that only humans can do.
Well, I noticed that you've written a book, The Rise of the Interim Executive. So tell us about that story. What has that meant to you?
Yeah, I co-authored the book with a lady called Caroline McAuliffe, who's Sydney-based, and essentially we both do the role. She's Sydney-based, I'm Melbourne-based, and what we wanted to put in was a practical guide of what, when we talk to individuals, we tell them individually. So I feel like it was pulling together the conversation that sometimes I feel like I have 100 times. And as I was having these, meeting people, I remember having a moment. Caro and I were at a Christmas party in Sydney, and I was like, I wish someone had written a book so that people could come to me already halfway through this conversation, so I didn't have to start from scratch the whole time. And she's like, I agree. And I was like, maybe it's up to us to write the book. So the aim of the book is very practical. It's, if people are thinking about this, where do they even start to think? How do you put a frame around, am I right for this? So that when you then get to have conversations with myself or people like me, brokers who can find you work, you're better prepared and you're a little further along that change journey of, am I in the right mindset and is this the right thing for them?
I think of people in that space, they'd have to be open to new experience. They'd have to be able to deal with the uncertainty of tenure. So what's happening after this contract, and if I have a break, what does that mean? So it's not, I wouldn't have thought it would be for everyone. Some people
Oh,
want the,
yeah, I can't agree more. We've got a whole checklist, and I think a lot of people would like it to be them because the upside of working this way is variety and flexibility and all the things that sound lovely, right? Really, who doesn't sign up for that? Then the reality of you are trading a traditional permanent income where you're fed, a salary once a month. You have to have some self-agency and ownership over your own network, and you have to be out there. There's no one that cares as much about you as how busy you are. And so it's no one else's, it's not a broker's job to keep you busy. You're not employed and on our bench until we deploy you. We're one of your channels to market. And so some of those risk profiles, the reality of working this way is absolutely when the rubber hits the road, people aren't right for it. We will often say things like, you have to have no ego. We would say to people, have you reached your highest jump off point? Because this isn't an aspirational role. People sometimes, I'm a financial controller and I really want to be a CFO. Maybe I'll get some interim CFO roles. That's not how it works. You have to already be overhit the mark, and you're at a stage of life where you are then saying, rather than being engaged for my leadership, some of my generalist skills, my leadership, my ability to think of strategy, my ability to solve a problem, they're all price of entry for an interim. And what an interim is looking to do is borrow a slice of what you can do that someone needs at that point in time. And that's quite a hard and very nuanced way of changing your mindset.
yeah, like David Beckham's left foot, for example.
Exactly.
That's a very good way of describing it. But one of the things, you've got the book and you've got the podcast now. So that came out last year.
Yep.
So take us through, how did that start and what was the spark there?
Yeah, we were thinking of another book, but mediums and how people engage and listen as your audience, and you will know people are a bit more open to listening to things rather than reading. And what we wanted to do, Caroline and I are in a really privileged position to have some really interesting conversation with people who are out there thinking of work differently, leading the way on different work models. And we come back absolutely buzzed from these conversations of all the things that's possible. And we're like, imagine if we could have someone who just sit beside us and listen to those conversations where we brainstorm and blue sky and, challenge and imagine and all those things about the future of work and what it could mean for people. So that was the spark behind it, that, because this is our world, we know people in this world, we have the conversations, we actively pursue and have the conversations with people in this world. How could we let others listen into those conversations so that then it might help them understand their own future of work a little better?
Yeah, well, I've got a bit of a backstory for you too, Jacinta. You were back in 2020, I think that's when we met.
Yeah.
And that was the point of time where I'd been a consultant at that stage, running my own practice since 2013. So 7 years, and I'd probably at that stage had enough, and I wanted to look at different things, and I was looking at interims and portfolio careers and whatnot. I also wanted to start up a podcast, and a fellow by the name of Neil Butler, who's been on this pod, introduced me to podcasting. I got on a couple of his podcasts, and I'd always wanted to do a podcast, and the time was never right, and I just hadn't really settled on what I wanted to do. And although interim and portfolio career was something of interest to me, so I had an opportunity in July this year where due to a cycling accident, I was unable to work for a few months, and it really gave me some time to think. And I was just wondering, what if I could do a podcast, what would I do it on? I might do it on a portfolio career. So I Googled how many people were doing podcasts on a portfolio career, and guess what? You had just started yours.
I love
it. Beat me by.
Sorry about that, but we're talking about different things, Bruce. So there's plenty of room for us all.
You stole my thunder, and so I was going to collaborate with you on that. But then what happened was, another colleague that I know very well, and he was my first podcast guest, which is Dr. Darryl Carlton. He's written 8 books on. Now, he's a person you'd want to have a chat with, I think, if you want to talk about AI, because he knows the ups and downs, the ins and outs of AI. He's written 8 books on cybersecurity and AI. He's just prolific. Well, we worked together, and I really enjoyed working with him because he was such a personable person to work with, and really enjoyed. We were on the same level about what we wanted to do, and when I mentioned the portfolio career thing to him, he said, "Well, I've got this book coming out. It's on AI governance." And I said, "Yeah, that's something I'd be interested in doing." And so then we started collaborating on the book, and then I set up AI Governance Partners. But
It's your sliding door moment, Bruce. And then this is your,
yeah. And then
love that.
I was trying to think about what do we call the podcast, and then then the two and two went together when it was 42 statements in the standard, and I thought that's got to be it. It can't be anything else, can it?
Divine providence, they call that, don't they? When it just presents itself.
Well, I've got one thing to leave you with. This is my favourite book. You won't know, but I don't know if you can read that. Can you read?
Oh yeah, yeah. She happens to get over it. Yeah.
Now, what I do with this book is that I ask people to give me a page number. Just pick any page number that you...
34.
34. So I'll open the book up. So just open the book up. Page 34. And it's got a quote on every page. Yep. So everything is okay in the end. If it's not okay, then it's not the end.
There you go.
So I'll just randomly pick a page now.
But isn't that, let's sit with that, because, we're talking about AI and, the journey and how big it is and how scary it is and what does it mean for mature people and the governance and all of that stuff. And I actually do believe it will be okay. I do think that I have absolute faith in humanity. I have faith in optimism. We have to,
We'll get through it.
Yeah, I really do. So page 34 was the right page to pick.
Well, if it's not the end yet, is it? It's only the beginning.
Absolutely at the beginning. And there's almost, it's so exciting. There's not a better time to be alive, because not very often you have the luxury of being in a model where it's being redesigned in your time. And the rules are being rewritten. Yeah. And so if the rules aren't written and we all stand up and decide what we want those rules to be, people at any other time in history would have loved to have been in a moment that was being redefined, and we are. And so I think that's immensely powerful. I think that should give us all great hope.
Yeah, it's almost a great leveler, isn't it? Because it gives the average person an opportunity to be something.
If there's no rules, then you get to write them. And I said, let's embrace that.
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat with you. I've got one last question for you, and I hope sorry to put you on the spot, but
that's okay.
What would be the one piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
I mean, I think it's probably that piece of advice we just got, that enjoy the journey. It's a long one. So for my younger self, I'd probably say, don't be so serious so young. And then I wouldn't say this to them because I'd change it, but the patterns will emerge over time. So be doing the right thing, be following your areas of interest, and sometimes don't worry about why, or does it make sense, or justify it to others to make sense too, which I think is important. But what I see is the people who have really interesting executive careers as they're a bit older have taken those opportunities and taken serendipity when it presents itself. And that's what makes the most interesting careers and some of the happiest people.
So what's the best way people can reach you? How do they get in contact with you?
LinkedIn is always easy. I'm on there. Probably too much, some people might say, but so let's use that as the best way to reach out, and I would welcome it. And thank you to your audience for listening to us, Bruce. What is the best way to communicate with people? I do think there's a piece of work for, as AI hits in and we all change how we work, to keep educating the market on these different models. So watching with some interest and have some ideas bubbling away of how we need to get that out there.
Well, thank you, Jacinta. You've been listening to the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI Governance, the podcast for anyone trying to make sense of intelligent machines, messy politics, and everything in between. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please give us a rating or leave some feedback. That would be really helpful for the pod. And I'll put some notes in there about how you can catch up with Jacinta if you're interested in the interim or the portfolio career space. But thank you again, Jacinta.
Thanks, Bruce. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. All right, that's been recorded.
That was fun.